All right. So Brother David asked me to obviously come up here and talk a little bit about some of the things that we've done as a family when we talk about protecting our kids, going through some of the technology. Really when Brian was really coming about where it was time for him to be able to get a phone, we kind of looked at it to say, how do we want to really introduce the technology to him to be able to do where he can do it? Did we want to give him a phone to go on TikTok? Obviously, that's not our goal, right? We wanted to be able to do it where he could have communication that's on the device, and we wanted to do where it really protected him from getting to some of those things that a lot of kids can get into, right? So we wanted to, when we introduced it to Brian, he was really at 13, I guess, the first time we introduced it to him. He actually went to a youth trip where he got sick, where he passed out. So we had he had the opportunity to be able to have that communication with him. So it really helped us to be able to have that, so where we could pay attention to our kids and know where they're at, do a lot of those things. So some of the things I want to go through is really just how I did it when we go to set it up. My background, I'm a network engineer, so I don't make a living doing parental controls on people's devices. But I know there were some things that was kind of hard for us to be able to set up. So I wanted to go through some of those steps to show you maybe how you can set up and be able to do some of those protections. So when we talk about looking at it for Brian, we started off to where we were doing just a phone device. So we wanted to be able to say, okay, if we're going to start, we'll start with a phone device, be able to have it to where his phone can provide that communication. And really, some of the things we were thinking of was really on 1 Peter 5:8. So be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary, the devil, as a roaring lion, walketh about seeking whom you may devour. So that's not just in Brian's life, but that's in our lives as well. So we have something that's set up to be, that's not just protecting Brian and Emma and our family, but also the parents as well, to be able to set up accountabilities and those types of things. So when we look at it, what devices do we want to do for protection? Obviously, phones is the main thing that we started out with. Tablets will do a lot of things where phones won't. So we do it back at home. So we've got the ability for him to be able to read books, Emma to be able to read books on their tablets that they wouldn't necessarily do on their phone. So there's different permissions for tablets than there is for phones to be able to set up those protections. And then computers is another thing that will kind of correlate a little bit more with tablets. So if you've got where we're protecting our phones, our tablets, and our computers, one thing that we don't think of are smart monitors or smart TVs. There's a lot of information that's on those smart monitors today to where you can do applications. So there's not necessarily cable TV that's being fed into them, but there is Roku, there's Samsung TV, there's Apple TV, there's a lot of different things that's going into it. And when you're looking at protecting all of these things, you're not just going to grab one item and say that this protects everything that I'm doing. It's really correlating all of those together to protect those individually to get where you're getting that true protection for the whole network. So that's where your Wi-Fi and your home internet would come in. You can segment traffic. You can have where there's two different networks, one for the parents, one for the children, where it turns off at night. There are ways to where, obviously, that they can get around that as well. So it's important to understand some of the things that you can do when you are getting around that, to be able to say, okay, well, I'm protecting my home internet, but when they're away from my home internet and they're using a cellular service, how do I protect that? So some of the things we'll look at tonight is, I won't go over all of them, but we will just really go ahead and just focus mainly on iPhone and Android when it comes to devices, rather than just going through all of the other checklists. Now, I do have something at the end that talks about more of the resources of what you can go to. So if you do need help with network, if you do need help with tablets, if you do need help with the smart TVs, I've given some recommendations that others have done, and it'll help you to be able to see. So when we look at an iPhone or an Android, being able to protect those, the Android devices actually have it to where they work better with these application controls than the iPhone does. The iPhone locks down a lot of that information, makes it where it's hard for an application to be able to gather that, where Android is more of an open forum that when you utilize Bark or Circle or any of the applications, it actually will control that device and give you more of the information than an Apple device would. So another way we look at it is going with inherent policies. So an inherent policy is going to be able to have where if I don't do the application, Apple has ScreenTime to where you can go in there and you can kind of look at it and say, okay, well, how do I control this? What are some of the parental controls that I do with it? And then Android Family Link, they also have a inherent as well. But if you are using Android, it's probably better to use Bark or Circle, something like that, because it does go more into detail onto the phones than just going with the individual device that goes into it. So with that, any questions yet on any of it? Has anybody set up parental controls on their devices already? Found it easy, hard, or was it?
My Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
It does affect some of the apps that the ones you normally use, like Google Maps and stuff.
Yeah.
I think that's sacrifice.
I think one of the main things that we ran into was once I made the changes, now they would come back to me and say, well, Dad, now this doesn't work.
Yeah.
So, all right, well, how do I go into that? So, yeah. Yeah. So,
the things that I've used seemed like it wasn't hard.
yep.
How do you really like staying on or disabled?
Yeah, they're pretty sneaky, right? They can find ways to be able to get into it. There are ways around it, and that's why when we were talking earlier about, some of your questions that you have, obviously I don't want to give the kids the secrets, or the kind of know-how of, hey, here's how I can circumvent some of the system, but it's important for parents to know what to look for, to say, hey, it seems like this may be getting they may be circumventing something, so we want to take a look at that. So some of the things of policies and hardware that I did, so you can kind of look at it, it's kind of like an example. Mine, obviously coming from a networking background, I'll have it to where it's probably a little bit more complicated and it needs to be on some fronts, but you can kind of mimic it with the other hardware that's out there for Wi-Fi and other consumer type firewall options. So you can take a look and see what's out there. So the system that we're using an all Apple ecosystem because it's just easier to be able to do it that way. When I talk about making it easier, it's because we have phones, we have tablets, we have laptops, we have Apple TVs, all of those things. Apple makes it to where if I wanted to be able to lock down individuals, and we'll go through some of that later, but if I wanted to lock down an individual, I can make one change and it can happen to all of their devices. So that makes it a little easier to do that. Now there's some things to where you don't want to do that. So a tablet will have different rules from a phone. So there's still some individual things that you have to go into. But for the most part, I've found that the Apple ecosystem makes it easier for others to be able to go in and configure those. So another thing we have in our house is an internet firewall because I'm a network engineer and we have to by law. So that's some of the things that we have to be able to protect, not just for outgoing traffic, but for incoming traffic as well. Some of the best firewalls that are out there are subscription-based. So those are obviously, they cost a lot of money to be able to do those, but they do give you much better protection than just what you're going to get from the cable company or something like that. Some of the network firewalls are going to require some expertise, but I've have some of the easier ones that you can go to, like Circle. I think Griffin is another one that I listed, where those are pretty easy on being able to set up. So another thing you want to look at is protecting and segmenting your network maybe as well. I actually have my network is set up to be able to do IoT devices, so any cameras, anything that has to do where it's not a person connected to it has their own network. That kind of protects you because the IoT devices, whenever you get somebody that wants to maliciously attack a network, those are some of the devices that they'll attack first. So if you have those segmented from your network, you can do something that's called a VLAN, which is basically a virtual LAN that it makes it look like it's not even on your network. So you want to be able to protect those devices away from your normal devices. Then really the last thing I think that was probably the most important for us was the family accountability. To be able to go into where Helen and I know each other's passwords, we know the passcodes, obviously we know the kids. We don't allow them to be able to change those as well. It's important to have that set up to where they can't delete apps, they can't change their passwords or anything like that. And we'll go, when I talk about some of the apps, on why that's important, that you don't want them to have that ability to delete apps. Of course, any of the accounts. And then the last thing is going to be the activity. So we want to look and see what activity that they're running on. Again, you're not going to get all of that information on one device. So if we look at somebody's iPhone, you'll be able to see the activity for that iPhone, some of the other activities that they have, but it's not going to give you that granular detail of what they were doing and things like that onto the device. So you've got to have other tools that are in place to be able to correlate and help with that. So with that, we're going to take a look, I guess, at the activity on a device. So any volunteers want to give me their phone and we'll go ahead and show everybody the activity? No?
Do you really want it?
Yeah. Sure. I'm just kidding. No. I was going to do the voting where it would be between, we're going to look at Brian's device or Emma's device, but Brian said, they'll pick me, Dad. They're going to, so we'll spare him. So let me see if I can share this on here. There we go. All right, so what I'm going to show on here is really when you go on our phone, so we already have it where it's set up to be able to see what's happening with the whole phone experience, tablet experience, computer experience. But if you have an Apple device, you can actually go in here. You go to Family. And if we click on, yes, you can see that. If we click on up here, we can add a family member if I wanted to add somebody. Obviously, I've got all the family members already on there. But this is where you would select that child's name. If they didn't have an account, Apple has it to where I think they're under 13 years old, that you can create the account for them. If they're over 13, they have to be able to create the account themselves. And I guess by law, they can't track children under 13 on the usage that's happening on their phone Apple-wise. But once they turn 13, all bets are off. They can grab all your information and know everything that you're doing. So just know that is the case with Apple, Android, any of those devices. But once you have those child's accounts created, you see here where I've got Emma, Brian, myself, and Helen. Once Brian turned 18, Apple takes it away from you having the ability to be able to view on that device. So they consider that an adult now. So for me to be able to view his device, I have to physically go to his device. Emma, though, is still under 18, so I can go into her device and we can see what she's still doing. So when I click into Emma, we can see that we have our daily average. We have some other things that are on here for screen time. And I can look specifically. We'll go to see all app and website activity. So this is handy because now I can go in and I can see her device remotely. I don't have to ask for her device. And this is going to take information from her phone, from her tablet, from her computer. And I can go back in time as well. So I think it lets me go back a few weeks to be able to see that. And you can see here that it just lists what she's doing on her phone all day or on her tablet or on her computer. So it'll list those things. So this will help me to be able to identify it'll help me to be able to identify what she's doing on there, that she may be doing something nefarious. So you can have it to where if something on here, if she's looking at notes for 6 hours, there's ways to be able to circumvent the system by utilizing another application to kind of get what you're wanting to be able to get at. So if I have a limit on Safari, but I don't have a limit on Notes, and Notes has the ability to be able to surf the web, now if I see on here that Notes is being utilized for 6 or 7 hours a day, there's probably something else going on there. So that helps give you a clue of what is going on, what's happening on that device that I need to take a look at. So, this also gives me the ability that if I needed to, so sometimes when I'm working in the office, I'll have where something is locked down for Emma, and she'll call me and say, Dad, I can't get into my schoolwork or whatever. This allows me to remotely be able to go in, allow that to be able to take place to where she can still view her schoolwork or whatever without me having to go down and get her device and be able to do that physically there. So that makes it a lot more convenient to be able to do that. Some of the things that I do specifically is that with the app limits, and Helen and I do this for each other as well, that if we're on an application, if you're on news sites too long or something like that, maybe you want to go ahead and limit those to where you say, you know what, I'm going to give myself a limit of 2 hours a day or whatever to be able to look at that. Or obviously for our kids, we didn't allow any social media, because it's a great tool to be able to do this. But unfortunately, when you have applications, it doesn't control those applications. So you may be blocking information that's on here, but if it's not an iOS specific application, then it's not going to take place. So for instance, if they had TikTok on there, TikTok is going to allow them to be able to do whatever they want. Even though you have parental controls that are on here, it's still going to allow them to do that. You have to go into TikTok and put the parental controls on that application. So that makes it harder to be able to make sure that, you know, things are working and they're not viewing content you don't want them to. Why that shut down? So that was a lot. Any questions yet on anything? Clear as mud?
Just with, oh, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
I was wondering, like, on, like, say, social apps.
Yep.
Are you able to, with the firewall, can you, like, block, like, certain things that are coming, like, on, if you get bombarded with, like, spam stuff that comes in?
Yeah.
Cut all that down.
Some firewalls can. It depends on the type of firewall that it is. Probably the biggest complaint that everybody gets is when they're looking at YouTube, right? I don't want to look at all of the videos that come prior to the video that I want to see. Firewalls can stop some of that, but there's actually an easier way to be able to do it. So there's something called a Brave browser. So Brave browser will do where it's actually blocking those ads. So if you go to view on YouTube, it's not going to give you any of the ads or anything like that. That's specifically on the device itself. But firewall wise, you can block, but it can get complicated on what it does, especially for like YouTube in that instance. YouTube is always changing the URLs for their ads. So that makes it hard for you to be able to locate and track, and you can't just do a wildcard because now you're getting rid of videos that you really do want to see. So YouTube and those types make it really hard for you to be able to block that content. And I found that, you know, Brave browsers pretty much got that where it's locked down to where I'm not getting any of those advertisements. So look for something like that.
Is that browser only for iOS?
Nope. You can put it on computers. You can put it on Microsoft, Android, any of them. Yep. So Brave. Yep. Yeah. So what you do is that when you're on there, just download the application onto your computer or whatever. So everybody probably uses like a YouTube app when they're going to view YouTube. Instead of using the YouTube app, just use Brave as a resource instead. Go on there, remember your password and everything else. So when you go in, there's no commercials onto it.
I would say the good thing about Brave is that I have it on my home computer and my phone. It transferred all my stuff from to Brave, and then remember the PC.
Yeah.
So the difference.
Oh, it's so much better. Yep. Oh, it's gone.
Yeah, there's no ads. That's gone. Yeah.
Very good.
What was the same?
That's Apple. So any Apple device like a phone or a tablet runs on iOS. Android or Google is going to run on Android. Justin?
I was going to say, if you have much experience with the watches, that's what we've got.
Yep.
And I mean, they're pretty flaky in terms of, usually it errs on the side of turning on downtime at all times of day and stuff. But, it's going to be on the App Store. You should be able to delete that. Now I'm like, I can't delete it. You ever?
So you don't delete App Store specifically. You just say not allowed to install applications, and that'll get rid of the App Store. Anything else? No. So again, when we talk about those apps, and when I talked about not allowing your children to delete apps, on that activity where we looked at the activity that was on there, if they delete an app, it'll delete all of the activity that comes with it as well. So kids will have the ability to be able to go on to whatever application. Say they went on TikTok and you allow them to have that. They can go on TikTok, do whatever they're wanting to do on TikTok, spend 18 hours a day on it. And then when you go to look at the device, like, oh, they're not on there because they deleted the app and then reinstalled it. And so it blanks it out. Another thing you want to turn off is screen recording as well. So a lot of kids will do they'll turn on screen recording when they go to hand you the phone to say, hey, I want to check out your phone. So when you go to look at the phone, they put on screen recording, you put in your passcode. Now they have your passcode. So they know how to get into it. So certain things like that, you want to make sure that you turn off so that, kids don't try to steal that information. Kids would never do that here, I know, but that does happen.
So, what about emails? Because I don't want to give her an email.
Yep.
Because of all the stuff that comes through. Is there a way that you use like a firewall? Does that help to block?
So the firewall won't help in that, but what you can do is you can set up forwarding onto an email account. So the forwarding can have it to where it not only goes into their inbox, but it can go into your inbox as well. So you can see what is being in there.
Like every email that comes
Yeah.
through, you will view it?
Yeah. Like we did that at first, especially for like text messaging. So we wanted to know what text messaging was being sent out, which ones were being sent in. So you set it up on iOS, you have where there's a phone number, that's their phone number, obviously. And then you would just set up a user, which would be my user account. So any text message that went through, it also went on my device too, so that I could see what communication was going across.
Very good.
Any other questions? You look like you got one, David. No? Oh. She wants to know how to get around the...
Having to get every single text. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So where you could just go in and say, okay, I can see what I want to without having to actually get them to your text message inbox. Kind of like you can see their ScreenTime and their usage. That'll be so nice. You're like, oh, they're texting them. I wonder what they're talking about.
Yeah. And what I did, because I didn't want it where my phone was getting blown up with a lot of that uselessness. So I actually had a...
That was exactly what.
So we had an iPod that I just put it onto that iPod, had another account. So whenever I wanted to go in, if I suspected something, I went to that iPod and looked at it. Yeah. I think that was it. I think that's all the gotchas. Are there any other experiences, I guess, that any of you have run across where you've had maybe some experience where, hey, I tried this, but it didn't work. Is there a better way to do it?
The notifications for text messages, if they delete the text on their phone, does it stay on the other device?
It does. Yeah. So that's handy as well to have it on a different one. You'll even see that on your own, where if you, like I have text messages on my computer, on my tablet, and on my phone. If I delete something on my phone, it's still on my tablet and on my computer. So you'd still have it. What's that? Yeah.
About YouTube ads.
Yeah.
For some reason, I happen to a few people. I know it's happened to me at first. When I turned 18 on YouTube, supposedly they were supposed to allow personalized ads based off content that I actually consume.
Yeah.
It would refuse to admit that I was an adult and therefore disallow it. But ad companies realized this account was associated with an adult, and so I got general ads, and they could say based off location.
Yeah.
And it wouldn't let me, like, I'll be going through something about knives, like pocket knife or something, and get an ad for tea room that was completely unrelated to anything that I ever looked up.
Yeah.
So it's the ad blocker.
It blocks all of that. Yeah. You would never get any commercials or any ads. Because obviously when you go into the YouTube app, it's got, like, for a while there, it had, "Are you gay?" was one of the things that it had, right? So when you utilize Brave instead, you have none of that junk. So it escapes all of that.
Is there any way to put that on the smart TV?
Brave? There isn't. Yeah. And with the smart TV, you have to be very careful because, like I said, it's each individual app and each individual app that's in there may not have the parental controls that you're looking for. Like there's Roku that comes onto the TV itself, and there's really no parental app to block any of that junk. Yeah. 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 I mean, TVs are still dangerous. We think that, well, because we don't have cable that's coming into them, but it's so easy to still get a lot of that information where there's not a protection to say, well, you're not allowed to download any applications. Well, on the TV, it doesn't care. So yeah, you want to download an app, here you go. And you get access to whatever is available in their store. So there's still, like Lester Roloff used to say, it's still a rattlesnake that's in the living room. Yeah. So I do have the resources as well. So I'll give this over to David. So if you want to be able to get some of this information, these are just some references to be able to go into it. When you were talking about doing it for the text messaging and only getting certain things, the good thing about doing an application on a phone versus doing it where it's inherent is that the application will sometimes come up. Now it's not great on how it does it, but it will come up with something to say, hey, they were looking at guns, so here's something that's dangerous. And it's because there was a picture of something with a gun on it or something like that. So you can get those type of alerts that you wouldn't get with an inherent type thing. So these applications kind of give you a little bit more, but again, they're way better on Android than they are iPhone. So yeah, look at each individual one. Yeah.
What about like gaming consoles?
Yep. There are parental controls on those as well. Yep. Yep. That it? That was easy. So you could have done this, Brian. All right. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.
So appreciate that for Brian. Round of applause for Brian.